How's it going? Ryan here at Etrailer.com. Today on our 2018 GMC Sierra 1500, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Airlift Load Controller 2 compressor system. Although a manual inflation valve to fill up or deflate your airbags will work just fine, they can be a little inconvenient, especially when you're trying to make changes on the go or you're not at the house. That way you're not going to have to go out and find an air compressor or a gas station and fill up your bags every time. So what's nice about the onboard compressor is you're not going to have to worry about any of that. You're going to be able to inflate or deflate your bags anywhere you are. So whether you're at the job site or way far out of town, not around an air compressor, you're going to be able to get the job done. And not to mention, since this does have a low pressure sensor, you're not going to have to worry about maintenance because it'll automatically detect that minimum pressure your bags require and fill them up to that. Now, probably my favorite thing about this system is that you're going to be able to not only inflate and deflate your bags right here, you're also going to be able to monitor them. So that's going to be really handy because many times it's hard to guess how much air pressure is going to be needed in your bags as far as only having the manual inflation option. So this way you can hook your trailer up or your load, put in the amount that you think is necessary, drive a few miles. If you think you need more air or you have a little too much, you're able just to make those changes quickly from right here, as opposed to having to get out on the side of the road, let air out, or pull over into the next gas station to fill them up more. So whenever you're ready to add air, you'll come up here to the switch and hold it down until the desired amount. Then whenever you're ready to let air out, you just come down to this silver knob, push down, and that'll release some of that air pressure. Now, compared to some of the other styles out there that allow you to make adjustments on your phone and monitor it from your phone and have all these different settings, I kind of like the more traditional one like this because you're kind of getting the meat and potatoes. You're going to just be able to monitor everything from right here and not have to rely on other electronics or batteries. With this one, you hook it up once, you know it's going to work, you're not going to have to deal with connecting to it and this and that. So this just gets the job done. Now, the onboard compressor is going to take a little bit longer to fill our bags up compared to your traditional gas station style air compressor. And that's because it is a compact design. It's going to be a smaller compressor. But in my opinion, that trade-off is going to be well worth it because it's going to be much easier to find a spot to mount that compressor. And in today's newer vehicles, everything's getting more cluttered and it can be really difficult to find a spot to mount an aftermarket component. And what's nice about this kit is it's going to work with any style or brand of air springs that you might already have. And it's not too bad to install. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and hook it up together now. To begin our installation, we're first going to start by mounting our compressor up. And we're going to do that on the side of the frame rail, on the passenger side underneath the front door. Now here's where I chose to mount our compressor. Now I just secured it directly to the frame using the included self-tapping screws. Now we are going to have two wires that come out of the compressor, a black one and a red one. The black one is a ground. So what I did was I just put that terminal behind our self-tapping screw. That way we could just use one bolt in one location to not only secure our compressor but also ground out that black wire. So now here at the back of the truck we can tap into our existing airbag lines. That way we can run some tubing up to our compressor. So what we did on each airbag, I actually cut that original line in half and then used a T-fitting. So one end will go into one T-fitting, connect to the other end coming out, and then on the single portion, I went ahead and ran this line over to the passenger side. So I went above the heat shield to help protect it from the exhaust. It came down right here, and I connected it to one end of the T-fitting. Now on the other end, right here, I ran some line into a T that taps into our existing airbag line. And that would leave us with one more open fitting, which should be right here. Now this one will run directly to our air compressor. So I took the included tubing, plugged it in, and ran it towards the front of the vehicle to our compressor. So I just stayed on top of the frame rail. It's a little tricky to see up here, but I used a couple zip ties to secure it. Just kept running it along. Which eventually it came and connected to another T-fitting right here. On the other side of our fitting is this a short length of tube that will just go over this brass barb that comes right out of the compressor. So that'll just push right on top of that. Now a little trick, if it's tough to push over completely, what you can do is let your tubing set in some hot water for a couple of minutes, and that'll make it more malleable and easier to slide over onto that brass fitting. Now for the other end, what I did was I took our tubing that is pre-attached to some red wiring, and that goes into that end, and this will run to inside of the cab of the truck. But before we run that red wire and this tube inside of the cab of the truck, the end of that wire will have a pre-attached terminal, and that'll actually just plug right into the red wire coming out of our compressor. So here's how I ran our red wire and our air tube up into the cab. I just brought it along the side of the frame rail, used some zip ties here and there to secure it, and I pushed it in through this hole, which it will come directly out of this side of the frame rail. Ran it across, and I used some clamps like this that are included with the kit to help secure it here. Brought it along through here, up and through this hole, which will bring it out on the other side of our frame rail. Here's where it comes out of the other side of the frame rail. Kind of looped it around, running it up through here. And then there's a grommet that's made from rubber, and I just used a utility knife to put a small cut in it, and then I was able to feed that wire and that tube up through it into the cab. Now I do want to point out, you don't have to run your wiring and your air tubing this way, but whichever way you do decide to run it, you want to make sure to avoid any hot or moving parts. Now here inside the cab of our truck, we're going to need to take our threshold off, which is this little piece of plastic that runs right through here. You don't need any tools or anything, you literally just get your hands under it and pop it up out of place. And then you can peel your carpet back. And this is the grommet that we made a small cut in to run our air tube and our red wire through. So here's where it comes out. Now you're going to want to run your tube and the wiring under the carpet all the way towards the back. That way we can lay our carpet on top of it and have our wiring come out close to the firewall, way back where our feet would go. So you just want to make sure you run your tubing and that red wire all the way forward. That way it'll come out of the top of the carpet here. Now we can prepare our low pressure switch and our gauge assembly. Now what we're going to do on the gauge assembly is connect our terminals that are on our wiring from our pressure switch to the actual switch for our compressor. Now there's going to be two different styles of terminals here. The yellow one will have two wires connected into it, and that'll get plugged on to the bottom terminal on our switch. The single red wire with the pre-attached blue terminal, that will get connected to the terminal on the top of our switch. So you'll just plug those right in. Now we can get the light that goes into our gauge hooked up. So what we're going to do is take the bundle of red and black wire that's included with our kit. We're going to strip the ends back on one side. And then we're going to attach a included terminal. So that'll just slide over the wire, and you can crimp it down. We'll repeat that same process for the black wire. Then once we have both of our wires crimped with our terminals, you can then plug them into the light. Now it doesn't matter which side each wire goes to, so you can just plug them in randomly. It's going to work either way. So we'll just slide onto the terminals. Then we can actually grab our gauge itself and plug the light in. Now the light has these little tabs, so what you're going to do is kind of line those up with the tabs, or openings rather, in the back of the gauge, and then spin it about a quarter of a turn, and that'll get it to lock into the back of the gauge. Now something I want to point out, if yours doesn't come pre-attached, the Airline hose that comes off of our low pressure regulator, you may have to connect it to this brass T right here into the back of the gauge. So that line would come onto that T. Now this will work the exact same way as that brass fitting that comes right off of our compressor. You could dip your line into some hot water for a few minutes to soften it up, and then you're able to slide that right over the fitting. Now the other end of our red and black wire that gets connected to the light in the back of our gauge, we can get all hooked up. So we're going to be running this towards the outside of the vehicle, if you will, over by our fuse block. Now the red wire comes up through here and gets connected to a fuse. Now I'm using a different style of fuse tap, because with these style of fuses, only one tap that's the correct size is included. So you will have to pick up a different style tap like this, which can be found here at Etrailer. Now the fuse I've selected is right there in that slot, and it is a 7.5 amp. And you want to make sure that your fuse is not going to have power whenever your key is in the off position. So what you'll do is you'll take your test light and check them to make sure they don't have power, but you want it to power on whenever you put the key in the on or run position. So that's how I verified and picked that fuse. Now the OEM fuse that I took out will go on the bottom of the fuse tap, and then I just took a spare 10 amp fuse to put on top of it. So that'll plug in like so. And like I said, the other end of that red wire will get connected to that fuse tap. Now as far as the black wire goes that's coming out of our gauge light, that's just going to be a ground wire. So what I did was ran it over to here, right here on the body of our vehicle, behind where our kick panel would go, and I secured it using a self-tapping screw and the included ring terminal. Now anywhere you ground, you want to make sure it's clean, solid metal. So now we can take the red wire that's running from our gauge assembly that has the pre-attached fuse holder in it, and we can run the end of this wire over to our fuse panel as well. And here's where our wire came up running through. Now for this one, it's a little bit different than our other one. We want to make sure that where we tap into has power all the time. So you want to check it with your test light, with the key not only in the on and run position, but also in the off position. And you want to make sure that that test light will illuminate all the time. So I chose this 15 amp fuse right here, and it's actually a spare fuse, so it's on its own circuit. And then I was able to use that fuse tap that's included. And then what we're able to do is just plug the end of this wire onto it. Now we can plug in our last remaining Airline into the T that goes into our low pressure sensor. So the way that you want to make sure when you plug all these T fittings in is you want the line to be cut nice and clean and sharp. So you want to avoid using any pairs of like your traditional snips or side cutters. You want to use a sharp utility knife or a tool like this, or they also make special tools designed to cut these nylon air tubes that you can find here at Etrailer. Go ahead and make sure you cut it straight, take a look at it, and that's the way your cut should look. And once you make your cut, you simply just plug it into the fitting, push all the way down, then just pull back on it to make sure it's fully secured. And finally, we can plug in the red wire that's running up from the compressor into this side terminal here off of our low pressure sensor. And when we plug this in, we should hear our compressor click on. Now I went ahead and secured our gauge to our dash using the included screws. Now wherever you secure this, you want to make sure that there's nothing behind there that can get accidentally damaged from running our screws in. Then once that's done, I took all of our excess wire, just tucked it up under the dash, secured it using some zip ties to help clean up our install look. So now what we can do is flip our switch, hold it down to make sure everything is working properly. And if it is, we can hold it down for a while, fill up our air springs. That way they're pressurized and we can spray down all of our fittings with the soapy water to check for any leaks. So I have my soapy water. I'll go ahead and spray down all of our new fittings. And what we're looking for is for bubbles to rapidly be forming at that connection point. Now if there's no bubbles forming, we know that it's not leaking. If there is bubbles forming, what you need to do is pull the line back out of your fitting, recut it, reseal it, and check it for leaks again. Now we're going to check all of our fittings for leaks, and once we verify that we have none, at that point we'd be good to hit the road. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Airlift Load Controller 2 compressor system on our 2018 GMC Sierra 1500.